Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and maybe, a bit uncomfortable area of human interaction. It's drawn from the material in The Essential Art of Beneficial Deception. This work really tries to face the reality that, deception is a constant human thing, and it attempts to set up a standard for, how we judge it. The premise is pretty straightforward. Since lying seems unavoidable, maybe we should stop focusing so much on the act itself and instead look at its outcome, its intent. And it suggests we guide that evaluation with just one key question. So the central question for our discussion today is this. Is the material's main metric, the idea that lies should be judged primarily by asking, who benefits from this lie? Is that a good enough, a robust enough standard? Can it really help us distinguish harmless social deception from truly destructive exploitation? I'll be arguing that this benefit-based framework isn't just useful, it's actually essential. It's pragmatic for navigating the complexities of, social reality.
And I'm going to take the opposing view. While I definitely appreciate the effort to create some kind of standard, I think relying primarily on this single metric, it risks normalizing dishonesty altogether. My position is that it fundamentally ignores the subtle but real cumulative erosion of trust that frankly all deception causes, regardless of who seems to benefit in the short term.
Okay. I agree that the question of where exactly we draw the line is tricky, no doubt. But the basic premise that lying is often necessary, that it can act as a kind of social grace, that feels entirely accurate to me. You can think of it as the lubricant that keeps relationships from just grinding to a halt sometimes. I mean, if we acknowledge that sometimes we have to say, I'm fine when we're actually far from it just to keep a social interaction smooth, right? Then we desperately need a way, a sort of non-judgmental way to separate that kind of required behavior from genuine malice. And the benefit test, I think, provides that necessary ethical tool. It lets us accept these benign lies, like giving genuine necessary hope to someone who's injured, the you'll be okay kind of promise. Or even the really common social lie, like complimenting, a piece of clothing to maintain a friendship.
And crucially, this benefit-based approach, it clearly and powerfully separates these kinds of necessary deceptions from the truly destructive self-serving actions. Things like the systemic lies behind the mortgage crisis, or the decades of deceit pushed by the tobacco industry. Those actions clearly benefited a tiny few while harming millions. That clear separation, that's the framework's core utility, as I see it.
That's a compelling way to frame its power against those massive, obvious harms. I grant you that. But I find the conceptual weakness of this whole approach really emerges when we try to apply it more universally, especially to those so-called social graces. Look, I concede that some dishonesty is routine. You mentioned the little fibs of, say, British politeness, or maybe slight exaggerations on a resume. Okay, but I just don't buy that simply asking who benefits is robust enough to manage that middle ground, that gray area. The framework, really by its design, it bundles together truly protective lies, maybe a parent slightly exaggerating a consequence to guide a child's behavior, with frankly mild self-serving lies, like claiming, oh yeah, I'll be there in 5 minutes when you know perfectly well you haven't even left the house yet. Both are forms of manipulation, aren't they? But only one really aims at the receiver's long-term welfare. The other is purely for the liar's temporary personal convenience. So, by broadly labeling almost any non-catastrophically harmful deception a social grace, this approach seems to ignore the subtle corrosive effect that routine dishonesty has on our collective reliability. Think about the common example of, checking the box that says you've read the terms and conditions. Does that genuinely benefit anyone besides maybe marginally relieving friction for the person clicking accept? The critical failing, as I see it, is that this metric judges the deception only by its immediate outcome, instead of, valuing truthfulness itself as the essential foundation of any functioning society.
Okay, I acknowledge your concern there about the slippery slope and where that boundary gets blurry. Let's try and grapple with that gray area head-on then. This distinction between protective lies and lies of, let's call it, self-serving convenience. You highlight examples like lying about being 5 minutes away, or maybe understating your weekend alcohol consumption to your doctor. You claim those are purely self-serving. How then can the benefit metric really differentiate those convenient fibs from the more deeply protective ones? I mean, aren't both sets of lies, at some level, primarily meant to benefit the liar by managing how others see them, managing external perception or judgment?
Absolutely, they often are. And that is exactly why the metric feels too permissive to me. In both the parent-child scenario you mentioned and the 5 minutes away scenario, the person telling the lie is managing the perception of their own competence or their authority or maybe their accountability. They benefit immediately by avoiding criticism or friction. The standard suggests good lies are told for someone else's benefit. But if the immediate function of the lie is simply to make the teller's life easier right now, well, that undermines the framework's ability to really distinguish between genuine altruism and just simple evasion.
That's an insightful framing. I'll give you that. But I would argue the line does hold if we look a bit deeper into the nature of the intent, not just the immediate self-relief, The difference feels qualitative to me. Take the parent gently threatening the iPad, as you said. That temporary threat arguably is an investment in future benefit for the child, trying to shape long-term behavior. That is a benefit to the receiver eventually. Now, consider underestimating alcohol intake. While, it's self-serving, it often prevents maybe unnecessary moralizing or immediate social friction. It keeps a potentially difficult interaction smooth, which you could argue is a secondary benefit to the receiver too, avoiding conflict. But more importantly, the framework really excels at its primary function. It successfully flags lies that cause massive macroeconomic disaster or huge public health crises as unambiguously bad. We can certainly, nitpick the boundaries of social convenience all day long. But the metric's real value, its power, is providing a robust defense against genuine, catastrophic exploitation.
But your reliance on convenience and managing friction, that brings us to the whole issue of fibe literacy itself, doesn't it? This approach suggests we need to train ourselves to become like expert lie detectors, constantly evaluating the cost and benefit of every single statement we hear. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that this won't inevitably accelerate the erosion of foundational trust. If society universally adopts the stance that, constant vigilance is required, that lying is just a necessary lubricant, we fundamentally change the societal baseline assumption about truth, don't we?
But if we accept that lying is unavoidable, which the behavioral evidence strongly suggests it is, then maybe the only responsible, the only ethical action is to become expert at discerning the lie's purpose. I mean, fib literacy isn't about promoting lying. It's about acknowledging reality so we don't just become perpetually naive victims. The ability to identify who gains from a statement is ultimately the key to self-defense in a world where, let's face it, deception is a given.
But think about the cognitive load, the social cost. If I have to be a detective in every single interaction, constantly asking, okay, who gains for my neighbor's casual comment, or my colleague's promise about a deadline, or the commercial I just saw, that sounds intellectually exhausting. The effort required just to maintain relationships increases exponentially when truth is no longer the default setting. And if that societal baseline for truthfulness decreases, doesn't that make us more vulnerable, not less, to the really significant deceptions, the ones that threaten systemic stability? Precisely because we're burning all our mental energy trying to decode every minor social fib. It feels like we're judging the fire only by the immediate smoke it causes, instead of valuing the clean air, the truth, as the default condition we should strive for.
I'm just not convinced by the argument that simply acknowledging reality automatically accelerates decline. Look, we are not advocating for more lying here. We're merely accepting its inevitability and trying to provide tools to manage it. This system of social graces, these little lies, it already exists whether we like it or not. This approach simply gives us a framework to handle it more constructively, perhaps more consciously. And let's talk about that connection, or lack thereof, between the small lies and the large ones. You mentioned systemic harms. Do we really believe that, say, telling your spouse their slightly burnt dinner was delicious, or claiming you're just 5 minutes away when you 10? Is that really the gateway drug to mortgage fraud? That strikes me as a profound overstatement of the slippery slope argument.
Well, perhaps the dinner compliment isn't the direct path to fraud, no. But I suspect that two realms, social grace and corporate exploitation, they aren't entirely separate silos either. When we normalize minor deception, even for good reasons like keeping the peace, we arguably train ourselves little by little to prioritize personal convenience or conflict avoidance over strict relational integrity. And that practice, repeated often enough, could dull our moral muscle, maybe making the leap to larger, self-serving deception easier for those in positions of power to execute, and perhaps even easier for the public to tolerate initially.
See, I disagree fundamentally that the practice of small, everyday social lies significantly dulls our sensitivity to massive, destructive exploitation. The sheer scale of harm caused by those big corporate and political lies, deliberately misleading the public about things like smoking health risks, which directly led to widespread illness and death, that fundamentally distinguishes them from the kinds of lies designed to maybe strengthen social bonds or prevent a fleeting argument. The difference feels qualitative, not just quantitative. One is cynical exploitation for profit and power, and the other, at its best, is arguably a genuine social grace meant to maintain interpersonal harmony. And the benefit test, I maintain, is perfectly robust enough to delineate that critical boundary. It allows us to manage the unavoidable social complexities without losing our critical focus on preventing truly catastrophic harm. It is the most useful practical metric we have available.
I do see why you emphasize the practicality. And you are right, the metric definitely flags the most extreme cases of harm successfully. But that boundary, it remains inherently fuzzy in the middle ground, doesn't it? And fuzzy boundaries, especially when we're dealing with moral standards, well, they always seem to invite erosion over time.
And I'll maintain that this approach offers an essential, and perhaps more importantly, a non-judgmental way to accept an unavoidable human behavior.
Recognizing the difference between lies that strengthen bonds and those that exploit, guided by that core question of benefit, is the most practical and effective path toward resisting genuine harm while accepting the sometimes messy reality of social conduct. It helps focus our finite moral energy precisely where it matters most, preventing catastrophe.
All the intention behind building this fibe literacy is absolutely laudable and probably necessary in today's world. The framework itself, it still risks being overly generous to the minor deceits. And that, I worry, potentially undermines the rigorous integrity needed for large-scale societal trust. If we spend too much time justifying the so-called good lies, maybe we neglect the crucial necessity of upholding truth itself, beyond just its immediate consequences.
Well, I think we both certainly acknowledge the profound complexity of this subject. This material definitely forces us to face the reality of deception head-on, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It opens up a vital conversation about where society truly draws the line, or maybe should draw the line, on truthfulness. And honestly, it makes me think twice about that email I just sent promising a quick response. There is clearly more to explore here, particularly about the social cost of convenience.
Agreed. Thank you for this challenging and clarifying discussion.